my first 3 weeks on the current offer I'm on now, I try to just follow the normal, Cole Gordon type process. I think it was like 2 deals. Right. And I remember hopping on with you and you're like telling me to do this and this and this. I'm like, oh, I don't know if my manager's going to give me push because like, dude, like you just got to grip it and rip it. And so I did that. And then in January, yeah, I went from closing like maybe 6 deals in December to like closing over 20. I was number 5 on the team, like you said, out of like 14 guys, and it had like 130,000 in revenue. There was a 3 week span there where I closed like out of 13 days or 14 days there. I closed like a deal 12 of those 14 days in January. And like, I think one of the very first things I texted you was like, dude, this is like the first time in a process where like it feels just natural. It feels like I'm
Yeah.
energized by actually following it.
Yo, what's good, everyone? So, back with another Level Up interview. Today, we are here with John. John, appreciate you coming on, man. I actually said this to you right before we started recording this. I think I'm very interested to do this one because I remember the first call you sent me. It was like a very NEPQ, Cool Gordon, Bizoppy call. And I said, you did a very good job for what is expected with that type of sales process. But you were always someone who said it was very unnatural to you. And so after going through Level Up, I'm excited to kind of have a conversation here because I think it's something that people could relate a lot to, like your current situation or like your past situation, I guess, and sort of like the changes that you made from a sales standpoint and sort of like how that affects things. But John, welcome on, introduce yourself.
I think I have kind of a, I hear a lot of people that get into this high ticket space that, come from different backgrounds, whether it's door to door or just corporate sales. And that's kind of me, right? I did a bit of insurance and a bit of door to door stuff. Yeah, now I'm here now. Been in it for about 16 months and been with you guys since you guys, I believe, started. It's like your year anniversary, right? In March
Yeah, it
or
is
April.
actually. Well, cool, man. So I guess to start things off, we'll just kind of talk a little bit, just give, a high level overview of like the offer that you're on so people know what you're talking about here.
Yeah, I've ever since I've been in the space for the last 14, 15, 16 months, something like that. I've pretty much been just doing B2C stuff, right?
Mhm.
Like mentorships, high level online education for various ways to make money online. And so I've done like Airbnb, I've done real estate stuff, I've done uh, e-commerce type stuff, and most recently now I'm on a stock trading offer where we teach people very very high level stuff, how to execute trades on a true day trading time frame in the futures market.
And the commonality I think you mentioned with all those offers, it was like very, very B2C. I feel like a lot of times you'd send me messages on those offers like, dude, I just hate the way they're making me do this. My sales manager wants me to ask questions like this and do this. And it just kind of like, it never seemed to resonate with you. And that's something that I can relate to a lot. If you're selling a B2C biz off to complete beginners, like they just kind of want you saying weird shit. And a lot of times it turns into a therapy session more so than like a sales call. And it just, two different conversations, two different outcomes, and just two different ways of going about it. And so I was just curious, maybe you can kind of dive into that deeper. Like, why do you feel like that type of stuff didn't resonate with you as a person and maybe drawn more toward like the way we do things?
Yeah, yeah, I was thinking about that last week when you asked me to come on and do this. Of like, how would I kind of explain that? I think, well, first of all, you got everybody who's been in sales at least a little bit knows that you obviously no two calls are the same, and I think that's what makes this job really fun and challenging, right? Because everybody's unique, but you can kind of break people down into avatars, right? Like you're telling
Yeah.
to a more analytical person or type A type person who's just like get down to brass tacks type of stuff. You have to treat them very differently. But I think one of the things I resonated with the process you guys have is like it was almost the way, as bad as it sounds, is like the way I would want to be sold to, right? It's like
Yeah.
I don't. Whenever we talk about like obviously name dropping like a Cole Gordon type script, it's almost like you said, like you're having to ask all these crazy questions that I think are kind of, for lack of a better word, cringe,
Mhm.
and it's almost like saving everything for the end of the call, where it's like I'm going to hammer this guy for 30 or 45 minutes with objection handling, and like basically turn into a life coach for 45 minutes, and like there's guys that do that and make a ton of money, and they're obviously very good at it. Like obviously
Yeah.
Cole is very good at what he does,
For sure. Yeah.
but I was just like, that's not how I would want to be sold to. I and so the difference that I massively saw with you guys was, I think you talk about it a lot. Is like I'm just going to treat this person like we're talking with each other now, like a human, right? Like he's a human. Has an experience that he lives on this earth just like I do, right? And we're just
Mhm.
going to talk about what it is he potentially wants to do, right? And I'm not going to ask him all these crazy things. Oftentimes I've found with, especially in the B2C space, people are coming in like, I want to make more money. Well, there's a gazillion different things you can do to make more money. Like maybe what we have here isn't the best solution for you. So let's just talk about that. And if, we kind of talk about that and we realize, hey, maybe what we have here is a good fit. Like, let's
Yeah.
just talk like humans. We don't need to do a life coaching session for 45 minutes.
I think a lot of times they'll have like one script, one way of doing it, ask all these questions. It's like, well, like John, what's going to be different when you're making $10,000 a month and spending more time with your family? But whenever you have like someone who's a little bit savvy, maybe some experienced guys, like A-type personalities, like they don't want to be dealing with that shit, right? Mm-hmm. And like some of that is out of control from a closer standpoint. Where like you and I were talking about this as well. Like they get on from like the VSL, like, oh, it's just a bunch of sales fluff, because like it's a video of like, oh, he's spending more time with his family, he's making money online, he's traveling, working from a laptop. And then conventional sales processes get on, ask those NEPQ emotional questions for like 20 minutes and then pitch. And it's like most people just get irritated by that process as a whole. And if you do that, like you're just going to capture a very small percentage of people, because it's going to piss most people off. At the end of the day, like you're going to make the most money in sales as long as you operate a process that is most natural to you. And I think that's kind of like one of the biggest things that we talk about in the group and Level Up and whatever else it may be.
I think that's one of the most one of the most massive changes in following this process that it made to me is like, this is process that we have here is designed to capture as many people as possible, right? Mm-hmm. Because you kind of started off in a way that's very natural, conversational, and it's not to say you can't pivot, especially if you have somebody that's kind of like been captured by that conventional sales process to a more emotional type of, diving in, getting a little bit deeper, asking some of those questions that you may sometimes feel as cringe, right? But some people do actually really like that. They open up and they tell you a bunch of stuff, right? But then if you do have somebody that's just not in that pocket at all, it allows you to pivot and just approach it in so many different ways. And that's it's not like a one size fits all type thing. And that's another thing that's just so great.
For sure. That's what I was going to say too. Like that flexibility is important. Where I mentioned at the start, I think you did a very good job, like with that more emotional type of selling, like the conventional sales process that people have, like the Cole Gordon type scripts. I think you did a very good job with that, but it was like very unnatural to you. And so like, you're always kind of like limited in the results you can get. And then if you get an A-type personality guy who's experienced and savvy, there's really not like a way to sell to them. They say to do the same thing, but it doesn't work. And so now that you have like a wider array of people that you could sell to, it's like every single time a prospect gets on the call, they're closable, right? But to get maybe like more into like specifics, what would you say are like the biggest differences actually on calls with like this type of the close and paid framework as opposed to like the conventional stuff that you used to do? Like what do you feel like resonated most with you?
I'll answer that in two ways, I think. But after being on I've been on a couple of decent offers, like pretty good stuff. Like even though like they had a good process, they had, good marketing, mostly in alignment, right? I would get to the end of the day after 5 or 6 or 7 calls and just be freaking drained, right? Like,
yeah.
And I think that so-called being drained was kind of a side effect of following a process that I found to be unnatural, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think one of the very first comments I made to you, because I think I've maybe made the switch to really fully following your process probably about 2.5 months ago, maybe 3 months ago now. And like, I think one of the very first things I texted you was like, dude, this is like the first time in a process where like, it feels just natural. It feels like I'm energized by actually following it, because I'm talking like a normal person, And so that in and of itself was probably the biggest difference I see, where I get done with 4 or 5 or 6 calls of the day and I'm like, whether or not I win or lose the sale, it's like, I still felt like I followed a good process and I could go to bed happy that day, versus being just completely drained. So that's probably the biggest thing. In terms of like maybe a more specific type of thing, being able to adapt to different types of avatars that you may come on. And probably the biggest thing that I saw is because every single training that you take coming up in sales, in the high ticket space is I feel like it's almost too objection handling focused. We're going to try and have our smooth talking word tracks at the end to try and get them over all these things. Why not have a process that pre-handles as many objections as you possibly can, right? Mm-hmm. Even ones that are like traditionally, I feel like kind of difficult. Like the biggest thing you have in like a B2C thing is like people are just scared, right? They think it's a scam or whatever. It's like,
Mhm.
instead of like wait until the end for them to maybe or maybe not tell you that they're scared or that they have escape, just why not ask them at the very beginning and just kind of addressing that quote unquote elephant in the room from the
Mhm.
very start. And so that was the biggest eye opener for me is like anytime I got an objection at the end, at the like once I started learning from you guys, I would go re-engineer it and figure out, hey, if I keep getting this, how am I going to implement this into my process to not get this at the end, right? Or if I do get it at the end, I can have something to revert to that, hey, we talked about this. So that was probably the biggest thing for me is like, hey, we can pre-handle most of what you would call objections from the very start.
Yeah, for sure. That almost becomes like what the entire process is like addressing and handling reasons why it would not make sense. And it allows you to kind of handle it and address it from, people say like the frame of it. Kind of like the A side. It's like you're not like begging, you're not like convincing. It's like, no, dude, you can't have the time objection. No, 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 no. Like it's gonna be so easy. It's just like, yeah, man, we already talked about it. You already agreed to it. You know what I mean? So it's just like a little bit different. And so I guess like last thing too, just like based on results. I remember a couple times you sent a message and you closed like 4 of the last 5 people you spoke to or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Whenever we started too is an important thing to do. It was like what, a
Mhm.
week or two into your offer. I know you finished like top 5 or so cash collect in the first month, but obviously I don't want to put words in your mouth. Just kind of speak to the results you got and sort of like where you ended up, after going through level up.
Like I said, I think the biggest thing, not even numbers, was just like I said, the energy, the following a
Yeah.
process that felt natural. But obviously, the results that come with it are very nice. So yeah, going all the way back, like I wanted to jump in with you guys way earlier because like I knew what you guys were doing was really really good, and that's why I joined as soon as you guys launched your group back in April, right, of last year. My first 3 weeks on the current offer I'm on now, I tried to just follow the normal Cole Gordon type process. I think it was like 2 deals, right? And I remember hopping on with you and being like, and you're like telling me to do this and this and this. I'm like, oh, I don't know if my manager's going to give me pushback. Because like, dude, like you just got to grip it and rip it. And so I did that. And then in January, yeah, I went from closing like maybe 6 deals in December to like closing over 20. I was number 5 on the team, like you said, out of like 14 guys, and it had like 130,000 in revenue, which
Hell
was awesome, right? Like first full month on the phone.
yeah.
So there was a 3 week span there where I closed like out of 13 days or 14 days there, I closed like a deal 12 of those 14 days in January, which was a nice little heater. It was
I
a lot
think
of
like the
fun.
coolest part about that is you said it is like the first month, right? And when it comes to like overhaul of a sales process, like a lot of that stuff comes from like iterations. And so the fact that you could see results where we're at now, and like it's by no means perfect. I know we talked about a couple things that can always increase like cash collected, and maybe there's a deal here and there that we felt could have captured, but like it just comes down to iteration. All right, at this point, a month in, like that's solid on the first offer, right? And so continue to build, continue to iterate, continue to make adjustments, and it's only going to get better from here. Last thing before we head off, I know something we always like to ask. It's just like, what would you say to someone maybe like on the fence, considering like working, level up, joining it, considering like changing the sales process? Any last words for someone in that situation?
What I would say is, if you're on the fence, I think high ticket sales is at a point now where it's evolved enough, even in like the 14, 15, 16 months I've been, and I'm by no means a veteran in this space, right? So take what I say with a grain of salt. But I do think you need to invest in something, right? And whether it's just for an education like this, and this is a freaking phenomenal education. You're going to learn a ton. But also just for the connections in and of itself, right? Because nobody's really getting hired, I think, anymore from like a free Facebook group at a high level offer,
Mhm.
right? It's about connections. So if you're on the fence of even investing in anything, that's what I'd say to that. In terms of you guys, man, like I think the biggest hangup I had personally was Richard specifically comes from that background of like, I'm closing like 40, 50, 60, 80 grand deals with these like 8-figure business owners. And I'm like, can this even apply to like talking to Johnny, who's a truck driver and makes 60 grand a year? Not to say that's a bad thing, right? But it's
Yeah,
obviously very different sales,
yeah,
right? And it turns out it can, and it can, and then some. So like the thing I'll say about this is it can be so adaptable. Like even if you're a setter, right? He's really freaking good at training setters too. Whether or not you're closing like 8-figure business owners or you're in the most B2C talking to like a 19-year-old who's trying to get his first e-commerce store run out of college, right?
yeah. Hmm.
We can take what this framework is and apply it to that at a very high level.
Hmm.
And I think that's really freaking cool.
Yeah,
So
that's a good point too. Someone actually asked me about that. They're like, "Oh, it looks like what most of you guys do is like kind of like high level B2B. Like I just sell B2C. Would it still work?" And I'm like, "Well, sales is sales, and people are people at the end of the day. And so it's the same principles, just maybe like applied slightly differently, based on a couple things like that. But at the end of the day, like I said, sales is sales, people are people. And if you kind of understand principles of like the framework that we have, back to our earlier point, it's having that flexibility to kind of like bounce around, adjust things, tweak things based on who you're talking to. And I think to me that is sales at a high level, which is why we call it level up, I guess, is to reach that level, be able to sell to anyone with the process that we have. And I think you're a really good example of that. Someone who came in, applied everything, and got really good results with it. And definitely only the beginning, but appreciate you hopping on, man. Yeah, we'll leave it here. Thanks, guys.
yeah, appreciate you.